this isn't going to show up on a transcript. It's just not going to be an A, B, C, D, or F.
YouScience is the ultimate field leveler. It puts all students on the same playing field. And that's really, that's what a lot of educators want.
Every student really deserves to discover their own unique strengths and see how those translate into meaningful career and academic pathways.
It's a massive gain for a local community who puts a kid chooses a gap, quips, works, stays, builds a family, stays here, buys a home, buys their food, buys their groceries, buys their gas. That's talent retention for economic development long term. And YouScience is the epistemology that you build that from. I mean, it literally is the base that you build it from. You should build it from. If you're not building it from, then you're just wasting resources and time.
You're listening to the Disrupt Education Podcast. Here are your hosts, Peter Hostrawser and Alli Dahl.
Welcome to the Disrupt Education Podcast. I'm Peter Hostrawser, here with Alli Dahl. Alli, we are in a new series. But before we jump into that, how are you doing?
I am ecstatic. If there's like an emotion, it's like you're like leaping off the page and coming out of the screen. That's how I'm feeling today. Because we are starting a series like we have never done before. I can truthfully say like we've never even gone down this type of series before. We've done different things on the podcast, Peter, for like, the 3.5 years. You've done different things for 10 years, but this series is a culmination of, it's like 6 months to a year's worth of discussions. Yeah. And so to be starting it and like kicking it off feels very surreal, but also like we are so excited to be getting this out to our listeners. And I don't even know what else to say. What would you say about it, Peter?
Honestly, I think one of the lines that came up in a lot of our preparation and conferencing and all these conversations that we've had with people is modernizing career readiness. And I like that because we're just bringing, we're really disrupting education. And we're working with an amazing partnership with YouScience. We have a 6-part series that we're putting together. You will see some of our previous guests. You will see new guests. You will hear stories. And it's just exciting to see that this partnership is something that, we've kind of had conversations with a lot of different guests and people and such, but this partnership just worked. And I'm super excited to just jump in and really starting to look at how we are humanizing people seeking out experiences, learning about themselves, aptitudes, interests, AI, and just really, it's not about just a quick checkbox. And I think we're going to find out all of that in this entire series. So I'm super, super excited. So what are we talking about in episode 1, Alli?
Well, episode 1 is really looking at the exposure gap in career-connected learning and really career readiness. And something that's come up on the podcast time and time again is, kids don't know what's possible for them outside of high school. And like, how do we even address that conversation? And I feel like me and you have circled like so many solutions or possible solutions or ideas. And like when we heard about, and we're gonna have to rewind a little bit, when we heard about YouScience, like before May, I didn't know about YouScience. I don't know if you knew about YouScience, but we had a guest, an awesome guest, probably one of our favorite guests. We love all our guests, but when somebody's been on the podcast so many times as this guest, I'm just going to say Jason Van Nuss. He brought up YouScience back in May. And it was just like we weren't expecting the answer. We were just asking him like what tools does he use in the classroom? And he basically was like, the only paid tool that I use is YouScience,
Mhm.
which got us very intrigued because this is somebody that we know, like, trust. And like when we are having these types of conversations on the podcast, I know we both leaned in and we're like, well, tell us more. And so that's where it kind of started. And when we kind of like went down this exploration phase of our own journey with YouScience and aptitudes and learning about it, we were like, yes, this is amazing. And we need more people to hear about it. And so, but it really came down to why do students not feel like they know what their next step could be
Mhm.
post high school? And so that's what we're really going to dig into in this episode.
And post college. I mean, we have that
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
So yes, yeah, I really like. I mean, we're going to focus a little bit on interest surveys to come into this because I think one of the things that we quickly found out was that students can't be interested in what they've never been exposed to. With that, I want to introduce once again our awesome talent pipeline specialist. Jason Van Noos. How are you, buddy?
Great. Thank you for having me.
Oh man, let's jump in. So my first question, Jason, is a simple one. Well, maybe not. How do you define the exposure gap? What does that mean?
Yeah. I mean, so the way you define it, I guess technically, I mean, maybe application wise, you go a couple of different tentacles, different directions. Is it's, I mean, a math formula, aptitudes over interests, right? Divide the two. Um, but when you're looking at that exposure gap, what it really means is the students who are not interested in a particular career, but not because they don't like it. They're not interested in it because they do not know that it exists. Either they don't know it exists in the ether anywhere, like, oh, I didn't know that that was an actual job, or they didn't know it existed in connection with their skills. Okay. And so a real quick example of that would be Um, I had a really, really bad experience in middle school with a math teacher. This is me personally, my story. And I always thought I was bad at math. Always thought I was bad at math. Um, and so I didn't have a tool like YouScience. And so I'm glad that I became a teacher, and I believe that was Providence. And um, but had I known that I actually wasn't bad at math, I probably would have taken another or looked at other careers, if that makes sense. So aptitudes are not just, things that or the exposure gap is not just not knowing careers exist, which is the main way, but it's also knowing how your skills relate to a career. And that's something that I'm equally passionate about. So, but it's just, the students who may be good at engineering but may come from a socioeconomic background where they have no engineers in their family, may come from a single family background or a single parent family where their mom may be a nurse or may be a healthcare provider, and that's what they're exposed to. Or they may come from a community that doesn't have any engineering footprint in it. So how would you expect a student who is really skilled and gifted and has all the peripherals and the tangentials and all these things to be good at engineering? They're never going to understand that unless someone has a conversation with them because they're not exposed to it at home, not exposed to it at school, not exposed to it in their community. Um, that's a big deal. And so that's why I've always said that, YouScience is the ultimate field leveler. It puts all students on the same playing field. And that's really, I mean, that's what a lot of educators want. That's what we strive for is making it equal for our students so they can succeed on their own merit. And UScience it allows the have nots to compete with the haves because it gives them the same tools, exposure to what they're good at, exposure to all their careers, and then connections based on how their skills relate to those careers. So absolutely.
You're literally saying my story because I
Were you bad at math too?
No, but here's the thing. Okay, so
Thought you were
brass
bad, I should
tacks.
say.
Jason gave like once we did episode 380, and if you haven't listened to that one, like there's a ton of great stuff in there, besides YouScience, which it starts around like 30-minute mark.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And he I was so interested, and I was like, you know what? I've always said to students when I was teaching, I said if I could go back and do it again, I know I would be an engineer because I like now when I was already in my career, already
Yeah.
in my career, I like everybody who I worked with was like, wow, you really think like an engineer because they either knew an engineer or like were married to an engineer or like worked with engineers. And so like this thought came into my mind and I had never heard of really engineering when I was in high school. The push really didn't
Yeah.
come until
Mhm.
afterwards. So I took the YouScience aptitudes and assessments. And when you look at my results for aptitude only, 8 out of the 10 best fits are some kind of engineer,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I now know, but like, no, I didn't have that tool back
Yeah.
then. Like, the exposure gap is real for me. Now,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, I love my career and everything, but I wasn't even aware of things that I would be apt at
Mhm.
and wasn't exposed to them in high school. Never had experiences to like have an opportunity to talk to or work alongside or have an internship or anything like that until I was already in my career.
Mhm.
Yep.
That's when I learned about engineering. And at that point, it was kind of like, well, maybe in another lifetime.
And those are both examples. Those so just that or the two examples of you were the exposure gap in not knowing the career existed really for you. I'm the exposure gap in saying, well, I may have wanted to do it, but I didn't know my skills related because I was told I was bad at math and I believed somebody,
Mhm.
And so those to me are the two most prevalent types of exposure gap. Um, you know, I just I think I could have been a really good engineer. And I think my problem solving, my aptitude show aptitude for those types of engineering. Um, but up until me taking U Science, even as an adult who's pursued multiple advanced degrees, I would have said, "Yeah, I'm not really good at math, though." Like, even as an adult, I mean, a late 30s, early 40s accomplished adult, I would have still told you, "No, I'm not really good at that," because I had the bad experience, and a teacher told me I wasn't good at math, and I believed him.
Mhm.
And I really just wasn't good at antiquated instructional practices. And I'm not going to say that person's name. I'm not going to give them any publicity because but yeah, I mean, how many students have that experience?
Right.
They're with a teacher and maybe they don't like that teacher, the teacher doesn't like them, or and we don't talk about those things, but let's talk about those things. Those things frame career perspectives too. It's
Mhm.
not just that I loved Miss Dahl, Priv, as you're
The
called, right?
priv.
Yeah, I love her, and she opened up a whole world of amazing things in chemistry to me. Those are great stories, and that shapes career perspectives. But it's also well, that teacher told me I wasn't going to be X or Y or Z. And I always make the joke, no one wants to be chapter one in their student's autobiography. Mr. Van Nuss told me I wasn't going to be anything, and I gotcha. Chapter one of my book. I'm proving it to you. Like, but there's so many bad examples of teacher-student relationships that frame that. You science is the way, again, to level the playing field and to say we had the great experience with the teachers, the bad experience with the teachers, whatever background you come from. Here's what you're interested in, and here's what you're good at,
Mhm.
and here are the careers that relate to both.
Yeah.
The ball's in your court. And that's what education has been striving to do as long as I've been in the game, 20 plus years. It's been striving to put the ball in play in the student's court and say, now hit it back where you want to go.
Mhm.
That's what YouScience does. Keeps the ball in play, puts it in their court, and it says, all right, where do you want to go? Where do you want to go from here? You want to go this direction? All right, here's the best plan of attack. You want to go that direction? Here, this career, this career, this career. Here's the plan of attack. Like, it's so efficient. It's masterfully efficient. It's unparalleled. It doesn't exist in any other software.
One of the things as educators that we usually say, and it's a statement that is universal, is, you know, people just don't know what they don't know. right? And usually when you're talking about youth, we'll be in the lunchroom at a teacher's faculty lounge, and a kid just doesn't know what they don't know. So then we've got to try to connect the dots. But we have this opportunity now, within technology, within AI, within platforms, and adding that human element to it, to really start to what you just said there, Jason, is uncover what we don't know. Right. And I think it's interesting because I really like that you're opening this series with us, because I know Allie and I, when we have conversations with you, whether we're on, and by the way, people, we're on like text chains all the time. We're talking
You
on
guys can't hear
LinkedIn.
me.
There'll be a phone call on the
Email.
ride home, right? All the time. But it honestly, I don't think there has been one of our conversations where YouScience has not been mentioned. And
Yeah, that's fair.
you're extremely, like, nobody's paying you for this, and I
Yeah.
think that's
Hmm.
what caught Allie and our eyes, is like, well, let's just talk to YouScience and kind of go into this. But I'm just going to go down to, and you started to answer it there a little bit, but you you said they're actually an ed tech company in our previous episode, that is actually about kids. Can you
Yeah.
unpack that? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Gosh, I love working with kids. I'm not going to get emotional, but I just love working with kids, and I think we all could probably make more money in other careers, right? I mean, and that's so. But what it is I love that light bulb moment. I love seeing when students come in and they experience something, and I love the success stories when a student, when I put them with a company and within 2 years they're making more money than me without any college loan debt or 5, 6, 8 years in college. I love that. I love knowing that that student, if they want to be single and travel, they can do it. If they want to settle down and get married, they have the resources to do it. I want to put kids in a position to succeed. And so one of the things that really hooked me, and I think I said in last episode that I hadn't even told that to you, science,
Yeah.
um, is just they are so student centric, like absolutely student. What's best for students, and they're open. They listen. I don't know many other companies whose whose CEO, CTO, and CFO or CMO would be in a text chain with me. I'm not on their payroll. I'm nobody to them. I'm a practitioner. But that's the thing, is that they don't care. They care about my input because I'm a practitioner who uses their product. And I
Yep.
see that it is the best tool to use for equipping my students. And that's where they say, okay, what does he have to say about the product? And they are absolutely student centric across the board. I've seen and heard stories. I've got friends of mine who are not at necessarily the top levels of U Science, but are territory managers in all states. And to hear their stories and to travel and to I've presented with friends of mine. One of their employees' name is Ivy, and she's over South Carolina territory. And I've had just conversations off the record, and I see what moves the needle for her. She's a former school counselor, and I
Mhm.
see what moves the needle for her. And that's why they work for YouScience, because they see the same thing I see, is that YouScience is about changing students' lives.
Yeah.
I've seen YouScience in certain scenarios take a student-centric approach that may cost them a little bit of money on the front end. That's not normal in ed tech.
No.
Let's cash in, let's get the money. I've seen them put students and put schools and put programs first when it means that it may not equate to a sale or a transaction, because and that to me is that it's not a transactional company. It's a company that's about changing student lives. And I think that as you go through this series, I'm sure you guys have some pretty big hitters coming up from their company that are going to be here, and I'd put money on the table and say that people will be impressed at the
Yeah.
quality of people. My wife's grandfather used to always say that ain't no count. That means they ain't no good. Like, you know, the people at YouScience have good count. They are of good count. They're just general people who love what they do and they love changing kids' lives.
Hey everyone, this episode of Disrupt Education is powered by YouScience, and they're all about making every student connected and ready for what's next.
Yeah, if we really want students prepared for life after high school, they've got to connect what they're learning in the classroom to real careers.
Through aptitude discovery, industry recognized certifications, and real connections with employers, students start to see what's actually possible, not just what's on a checklist.
And let's not forget, for educators, YouScience gives us the tools to build those connections for every student at scale. That's the foundation of a truly career-ready learner.
Check it out at uscience.com/disrupt education podcast.
I think Peter and I, we're always looking for like what's really going to disrupt education and do it in a way that's like best for kids. Like
Put them
our
first,
hearts
right?
are with yeah.
Yeah.
And so we're always trying, like I've said this before, we're always, it's not like we're trying to find the magic bullet, but like at the same time, we are trying to use this platform to promote the absolute best, like people, programs, like tools out there that will benefit students and actually make a difference. Like I think about how useful this tool would have been my first year of teaching.
Really?
Like I can remember this one student, my first year, Cameron, and he was so good at chemistry, just had a mind for it. The numbers, like he saw it globally, he saw it sequentially, like he would always be asking deeper questions beyond the scope of the class. And I remember one day in class, and I'm sure everybody in that class will remember it. Shout out to 6th hour, my first year teaching. And I was like, Cameron, what do you want to be when you're done with high school? And he's like, well, I'm going to be an accountant. And I was like, what? An accountant? What are you talking about? And he's like, well, my parents are accountants, so I'm going to be an accountant. And I was like, no, you're going to be a chemical engineer. Like I could just tell. And I guarantee you, if he took the YouScience like assessments, it would totally show his aptitude for that. And guess what?
Yeah.
He is today. He is a chemical engineer. But like, imagine I had that tool, and it's not like I could tell everybody's aptitudes. Like I could really help kids in my area of expertise, but there are areas that I'm just not the expert in. And I think to myself, how I could have helped students understand chemistry better with their natural like strengths and talents. And so
in the area of recruiting too, Allie, I mean, think
oh,
about athletic recruiting, think about career tech ed. And this is something I fight, and I don't know a way to get around it. But the perspective of, I teach welding and Peter teaches construction and you teach fashion, that we're all fighting over recruiting the same kids, and that we have to have enrollment numbers to justify our position. And when you have to recruit students and you have to, I think students are skeptical of the sales pitch. Does that make sense? They're skeptical of the sales pitch. And what YouScience allows people to do is to move past the anecdotal, to move past the stories, to move past the, you should come to my program for XYZ, and just to go in and say, hey, look, I would love to have you in my program. This is exactly the program you need to be in. It matches here, 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 and here. And it's not a sales pitch. It makes recruiting for programs easy. It makes enrollment in programs easy. It makes vetting enrollment easy. And just a real quick side story to this, my counterpart who helps me with work-based learning, she runs our teaching as a profession program. And so she came and talked to me and she said, hey, I've heard you say you can use YouScience to recruit for programs. Can you help us with that? And I said, yeah, absolutely. So I ran a middle school report for all 3 of our middle schools for students who had an interest or aptitude for education. And then she went to those schools and called an assembly, recruited people who were interested in that specific, who had an aptitude, but maybe not an interest, because the kids who are interested are going to know her anyway. The aptitude. And then she went in and her enrollment has never been higher. like literally the very next semester, the kids came to our campus. She had set enrollment records. And so I'm saying is this kids are skeptical of the sales pitch. When you go to them and you say, look, I'd love to have you in the program, but I want you to be where you're best fit and where you best want to be. Um, here's where, I mean, look, this is no sales pitch. This is the data. No stories, no anecdotes. Boom. And so that would be, it would be, you're right. It'd be a tool. It should be a tool at everyone's disposal to put kids in the best position to succeed. Because if that's
Yep.
not what we're in the business for doing, or what are we in the business of doing? You know?
Well, think about employers too. Like, I mean, they want
Mhm.
to recruit strategically, right? But if
Yeah.
they don't, if students don't know that they're even like good at something, they haven't been exposed to a career, right? Like,
Hmm.
so just some, I was kind of blown away with some of these statistics that I learned about through going through this process of preparing for this podcast, but from a future workforce report, right? So and you have like this is specific to like I think it was like over 450,000 students. So it
Hmm.
was like a lot of people did this survey. But it's like 36% of students have an aptitude for health science, but only 8% expressed interest.
Yeah.
Like that's almost a 30% gap. Or like
Yeah.
IT. 27% of students have an aptitude, but only 3% express interest.
Yeah.
Like if in manufacturing or finance, the gaps are like around 18%.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
those are big time careers. I didn't know anything. Let me frank. I didn't knew nothing about manufacturing, finance,
Hmm.
transportation, or logistics when I was in high school.
Yeah.
Not a single thing about those careers. So even if I know I have an aptitude for logistics.
Yeah.
Like I would be in that gap,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me, I mean, you say gap, but it reminds me of um, that Jack Nicholson quote, "You want me on that wall, you need me on that wall." It's like, that's going to be like my new sales pitch. I just thought about not having a sales pitch. That's going to be like my new marketing strategy is I need you in that gap. Like there's a 24% gap. Like I need you in that gap, you know? But no, seriously, you're 1,000% right. It's, students, and this is not about for your listeners and your audience. This is not about pushing kids in direction. So, like I said, that tongue in cheek, like I would never want to push a kid to IT just to fill the gap. But if there's a local employer who's an IT employer, and the students have an aptitude for working in that industry, but they're not interested in that industry, it's my duty as an agent of the school system funded by tax dollars to expose this student to the options. Hey,
Mhm.
look, are you not interested in this because you don't like it? Okay, great. Then don't do it. But are you not interested in this because you've never been exposed to the potential of career? Do you want to get, and then you can filter careers in YouScience by, IT that requires 4-year degrees, 2-year degrees. I mean, there's so many different levels and nuance of that, but we need to put those kids in a position to choose the gap because to us it's a career gap, it's an exposure gap. But you know what I try to talk to students about is what does an exposure gap mean to them? What is that critical gap in industry? What's it mean to them? It means job security. You
Mm.
put a student in a high exposure gap. What that really means is job security because there's not a lot of kids coming behind them to take their jobs. And so that's what it means to kids. And you want to really look about, that I always make that joke about what the difference between a job and a career. Job stands for just over broke, and career stands for consistent advancement, real earnings, and economic reliability. And you put a kid in a scenario. For those of you who aren't visually minded, your science that spelled out career.
You're like the
Consistent
acronym
advancement, real
king.
earnings, and economic reliability that spells career. But the that is that puts a student in a position to really have a career with that long-term financial stability, where they're not having to worry about the jumping from job to job to job to job. They're in a career, and that's a massive gain for a local community who the kid chooses a gap, quips, works, stays, builds a family, stays here, buys a home, buys their food, buys their groceries, buys their gas. That's talent retention for economic development long term. And YouScience is the epistemology that you build that from. I mean, it literally is the base that you build it from. You should build it from. If you're not building it from, then you're just wasting resources and time.
That's so interesting because we started this whole thing off as, a bad middle school experience for you.
Mm, yeah.
And honestly, since I've known you, you've been a numbers guy. Like you've been very like data driven, but humanizing data.
Hmm.
And that's where I want to kind of take that data and those things that are happening in your classroom
Hmm.
and how you've seen that and kind of where the data meets reality in
Hmm.
learning and in the education system, right?
Yeah.
So there's got to be like a couple of
Hmm.
stories through this.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you just share a breakthrough story?
So you're talking about how these gaps show up in my classroom? Is that what you're asking for?
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
start there, and
Yeah.
then I mean, there'll be a story behind it.
So I don't want this to come across as a cute answer, but here's the problem. The problem is when the exposure gaps show up in your classroom, because that means that they're in the wrong class.
Hmm.
You follow me?
Yep.
That is
Oh,
the problem. Is a student who is in your welding class because it's the only class that was open, or because what they wanted wasn't available, um, or because they didn't know that they're really better suited for IT based on their aptitudes. So that is the problem. Because if you really want to boil this down and get into
hmm.
semantics of classroom management and school management and all this, I don't know that you could qualify or quantify the value of having a student who is voluntarily engaged in a class. What
Hmm.
does that look like on the back end of behavior and disruption? A student, I can almost, and it'd be really interesting research for anybody who out there who's got more time than I do. I would love to do this down the road, but I would love to do some research on the value of a student who's voluntarily engaged and wants to be where they're at and is choosing to be there and wants to be there every single day versus a student who got put in culinary because they didn't know what other elective to pick. And oh, well, there's 5 spots available here. And you plug them in there, and a kid who hates cooking, but they're in a culinary class. You know, I would expect you probably have more discipline behavior problems, referrals from that scenario. So that's what that to me is that is the problem. When
Hmm.
the exposure gap leads to wrong enrollment, that is the problem because that seed blooms in a lot of really ugly ways.
Hmm.
Behavior management, maybe poor grades, um, maybe taking, like I said, sequential classes in the wrong area. Um, it not capitalizing on the student's skills and what they want to do, what they should be doing. So again, I don't want that to be a cute answer. I'm not trying to get around your answer,
Hmm.
but I think that it is the problem itself when they show up in class in wrong enrollment because they weren't given the proper tools and exposure to all things that were available. That it is the problem.
Okay, so then how share a story where using YouScience addressed that gap.
Yeah. So I have a story that comes to mind, and it's not so much. I didn't solve it on the enrollment side. Okay. So, but I solved it on the work-based learning side. And I may have had to, bend politely, respectfully a few rules. But it's a good story. It's a good success story. So had a student came in our program this semester. So just what is it? It is October, early October. So early August. So just a couple of months ago, kid came in my program, and Georgia Power. For those of you who don't know, I'm from Georgia. Um, is really starting to ramp up work-based learning in our state, and they were opening up some positions, and a fleet mechanic for their vehicles came open. And I asked some teachers for some recommendations, and uh, our engineering teacher came back to me and said, "Hey, he was just there talking to me actually when I got the email. So it's a pretty cool story. He's in here talking to me while I got the email from Georgia Power, and I was like, "Oh, cool. You know anybody in your class?" And he turned around and said, "That kid." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, yeah, that kid, like he's and said his name. Obviously, he didn't say that kid. I just don't want to keep the kid's name, off the podcast. But said, yeah, that young man. He's in engineering, but all he talks about is cars. All he talks about is cars. And I was like, hey, come here. And so we talked, and he's like, oh yeah, I want to be a mechanic. And I was like, why are you not taking any automotive classes? And he's like, I don't know. And I was like, okay. Well, I'm not going to let that stop us. And I said, do you really want to be a mechanic? He said, yeah. And so we went through the process, and he applied, and not only did he get the job, he is the first 17-year-old that Georgia Power has ever hired through that program. Um, and it's such a success story. And so what happens was he told me he was interested. I went to YouScience, and we looked at his aptitudes, and we looked at this, and I said, yeah, you're interested, but do you have the ability? And he, all of his results were tools related, were trades related, and he's an engineering kid, so he has the aptitudes, that he has the mental wherewithal to go to college and succeed in college. He's like, but I just want to go work on cars. He said, it's just I do it for fun. So wouldn't it be a good idea to do it for a career? And I was like, yeah, buddy, that's the best answer I've ever had a 17-year-old give me. If I do it for fun, why not get paid to do it? 'Cause I always tell people, find what you love to do and then find a way to get paid for it, right? He's 17 years old and he already had that. And YouScience is what gave me the confidence to take that student and put him, because you got to realize I've been trying to get him with Georgia Power for a while. Like they're a big bell cow, and they're a huge employer in our state. And so I would not have put a student who did not have an automotive background as the first person they meet for my program if I weren't confident in his YouScience results. His YouScience results showed the aptitude, showed the interest. And so I said, even though you didn't I'm not going to punish you because you weren't exposed to the right courses. Let's move forward from here. But if I didn't have YouScience, I'll be honest, I wouldn't have put him there. If I was a teacher who didn't have it in my program, I would have had no data other than that he wanted to go make, and Georgia Power's paying him pretty well. And so I would have been convinced that he just heard the salary and wanted to go get that. But now that I saw he said he was interested, I looked at his YouScience results, it matched it, and I said, let's go, let's do it. And he got the job. He starts next week. I'm super excited.
Well, that's a 10% finder's fee there, man. Let's go. Like, that's awesome.
Man, if I could do that, I would be set. I would be set. Students are pulling in $34 million of economic impact since I started here. Absolutely. Give me 10% of that.
There you go. So see, he's good at numbers, folks. Alli, this really does remind me of some of the conversations we've had with some of our past guests who, obviously my first guest, which is Derek Griffin, DG sax, the saxophone player and everything. And the conversations with like Abby and Liam and how they even post college kind of went through it and are still in this kind of foggy area. And Derek will be the first one to tell you, like, he's in a business background, but man, the kid's a musician at heart, and that's where his aptitude lies. Definitely where his interest lies, and he's kind of battling between those two because he went to a 4-year, actually got his MBA in like 5 years, and kind of went down that road. So what let's dig back into our guests there, Alli. What kind of stories do you remember them saying where there was this gap, and maybe there still is?
I mean, I definitely remember Liam being like, oh yeah, after college, you just like get a job and, it's college plus. You're like still figuring it out. I'm like, what? What do you mean you're still figuring it out? Well, like he had an interest aptitude. I don't know. Like, I just feel like it. And then Abby, and Lindsay, even from this summer's episode, their stories just share the same thing. And they were students of mine where it's like, there's only so much I could do. I felt like in hindsight, it's like the blind leading the blind. Mm-hmm. Like teachers are such good-hearted people. They want to help students. That's why we're all in education, right? Like as you have, as we've all stated, and it's like, but I can only help to a level like that I know. And I've had plenty of life experiences, but I didn't get a degree in career counseling. And then,
Mhm.
like, I was at a high school that, and the numbers are even probably worse at others, where you've got one, if you have one career counselor for the whole school, or like juniors and seniors, or like, and if you've got 1,000+ kids, heck, even if you have like a couple hundred kids, that you can't have individual conversations. There's 180, around 180 days of school. You got more than 180 kids? Like, how many conversations can you have?
Right.
Right? Like, realistically, and like meaningful ones. So I if you empower all of your teachers, or like everybody in the building can look up these
Mhm.
results, I'm thinking like we're doing school wrong. Well,
Hmm.
obviously, but
100%.
like in terms of building programs,
Yeah.
what if your kids that year are like really have an apt for logistics? And so it's like, why are you not like creating courses for those kids
Hmm.
like in high
Yeah.
school? Like, we're like building stuff
Yeah.
backwards. We're just creating these programs because like whatever reasons, but like why not reverse it? Get these aptitudes and interests in elementary, middle school, and then you know who's coming, what they're
Hmm.
apt at, and like how you can develop skills, because then you're building your pipeline. And I'm sure there are businesses in the local communities that would love to help build the skills of students that they know have aptitudes for things in their industry.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we can still meet all the standards. We
Right.
can still meet all the standards.
Yeah. I think
Forget
one of,
chemistry.
no, I mean, yeah, that's one of the signals this takes me all the way back to the originate. That this is why it really connects with the Disrupt Education podcast, because the beginning of this entire podcast was asking students, how would you change school? And guess what? They didn't know what they didn't know even then, but they were saying, why are we taking the same thing over and over and over again? And it's just regimented and it gets boring. And so underneath of that, you read between the lines what, Jason, you shared, and Allie, what you shared, and what we're talking about. They are talking about the gap. They are literally
Yeah.
talking about this exposure gap, because
Yeah.
they're like, I've been exposed to math for 4 years and it's just math. It's not connected to something.
Mhm.
Nobody knows me. And they don't know why people don't know them, because I mean, logistically, like you said there, Alec, I mean, you have 180 kids a day. I mean, I can't really get into the heads and try to find every one of the aptitudes. But now we have this technology, and then we also have the interesting look of what aptitude can do with interest. And I'm sure in this series we're going to dive into that. But Jason, I want to kind of like on a district level, right?
Mhm.
So Allie just started to mention things like, what if all teachers knew more? And we've said this before on the podcast. What if all teachers
Mhm.
had the aptitudes of students? How does that change strategy and or culture of school? And again, I know I started this podcast and I wanted to change the world in 10 minutes, and it's not going to do that. I think Scott Carr reminded us of that. But like, what are some of the cultural or the strategic changes that you have seen
Yeah.
within your district or even your department? What does that look like?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll say it's, one of the biggest barriers to that is the eye roll, massive exhale, sigh. It's one more thing I gotta do. Right?
Hmm.
Like that's a barrier. That's a
Sure.
barrier. And I understand that because I felt the same way when I was teaching graphic arts and my school was like literacy standards. Every class is teaching literacy standards. And I'm not a literature teacher.
Hmm.
I love to read, but I wasn't trained. So I'm not saying that's not a finger wag at the teachers. Every teacher has so much to do.
Hmm.
We have to get buy-in from them. And so what I did with academic teachers is I said, you could use YouScience as a way to set up your seating chart. Don't put four extroverts together. Okay. You could use it as a way for behavior modification for PBIS strategies. Okay, so that positive behavior intervention system, I can go in and say, hey, little Johnny's in my class talking a lot. Little Johnny, be quiet. Little Johnny, be quiet. Third, fourth day in a row, I'm sending him over to the principal's office. He gets written up. He's detention, then maybe ISS. He's out of my class. He falls behind. Whereas now I can say, oh, wait, Johnny's not being disruptive. I look at his YouScience results. He is an extroverted brainstormer. He's trying to engage with my content the way his mind works. So now instead of putting him in a disciplinary process, now I can use those aptitude results to pull out and say, hey, Johnny, look, I know you're extrovert. And I know that sometimes when I have to teach for 30, 40 minutes, that may be tough for you. But then you go and you flip in the brainstorm section in YouScience and say the things that may be difficult for you. And it shows him, say, here's how you behave. Here's how you function successfully in my class during the times of instruction that don't meet your modality.
Yep.
Right? What about you mentioned earlier, Abby, Allie, what about going in and structuring programs, offering programs based on the longitudinal data coming from your middle schools? USAC has a middle school portion. You can see the talent coming, right? Is it not economic and fiscal malfeasance for us to take tax dollars and to spend them on programs that are not developing talent that our community can consume? It is absolute malfeasance for our systems to take tax dollars and still be teaching. Let's just say I'm a graphic artist. This is going to sound bad. Graphic art, like Chat GPT can do all that for you now. I'm not saying it's not a good career. I'm not saying that. So please, graphic artists, I'm one of you. I taught it. That's what I used to teach. But why are we having 75, 80 kids go through a program that is on the list for fastest declining programs in the country?
Yep.
We should be using those resources, but what it comes down to is, well, Jason, we've already got the equipment, we've already got the teacher, we've already got this. It's like, no, that's fiscal malfeasance. You should be putting those tax dollars to develop talent that our community can consume. Because if our community can't consume it, I'm using your tax dollars to develop talent that's going to have to leave our community to get a job. That doesn't make sense.
I mean,
Yeah.
you've given a few really good examples there, and I think about this all the time because we call them the core four, right, or your academic courses and such. When you're looking at like aptitudes and understanding, like you don't. I think we just all got to get over the I hold all the knowledge, right?
Yeah.
I'll be
I
honest,
hope
Jason.
so.
I'm going to be arrogant here. I can teach
Mhm.
anything. I can.
Mhm.
You can put me in a classroom with Greek mythology, and I'll figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. I may be
know,
teaching, I
but
may be teaching on Tuesday what I learned on Monday, but I can do it.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying that to be arrogant, but really, here's how I do it. It's not really about the subject.
Mhm.
It's about the student
Yeah. Yeah.
and connecting
That's
it with
cool.
their reality. So if
Yeah.
you don't know their reality, you
Yeah.
don't know what their apt is or and their interests and how all of that meshes up, you can't
Mhm.
communicate with that kid,
Yeah.
right? And I think that this could be where the disrupt education of teaching
Mhm.
becomes coaching and mentoring and not
Yeah.
look, I'm not a teacher. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not. Like
Yeah.
YouTube's a teacher or TikTok's a teacher or the experience or the internship or those things
Mhm.
are the teacher. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, you didn't forget the question, man. You nailed it.
Yeah.
I'm just
Other
like,
blockers, I would just say other
yeah.
blockers are myopia, district leadership myopia.
Hmm.
And again, I'm not wagging, it's not a finger wag. They have a lot of things on their plate,
Hmm.
but we don't have time for that. It's how we're going to administer that. How we're going to train the staff to do it with efficacy. Um, I think apathy and myopia are shoulder to shoulder there.
Hmm.
Parental bias is another blocker when it comes to people, but YouScience tackles that when you use it correctly, because you
Hmm.
can not only see the students' aptitudes and skill, but you can also track a career longitude and say, here's the potential openings in that career moving forward. Here's the salaries for that career moving forward. Here's the majors that'll get you a job in that career. Here are the colleges that offer those majors and in those states, and here are the scholarships at the colleges that offer the major in the career. I mean, YouScience has gotten tentacles that go all the way through the career process.
Hmm.
And so every blocker, I have not found a legitimate a legitimate block or barrier that is not with just a modicum of effort, if not easily solved within a school system. There's no reason every school system shouldn't be using this program, because there isn't really anything that's even like it on in industry. I mean, it is in a league of its own. People say that all the time. It's a league of its own, second to none. Like, I've seen the competition. I've seen it. They want me they want me to champion their program. I'm like, no, because I'm not championing YouScience because they're paying me. I'm championing it because it's producing results and nothing else has in my program. So that's why I'm doing it. Like, I'm loyal to them because they're serving my students. That is it, right? It is the best program, and so there isn't a barrier that a viable barrier to keep people from doing it. Um, once you have access to it, absolutely not. And it's such a burden lifted too. Like, when you put a student, when that mindset shifts and they see the exposure gap and the student picks a career that's good for them on their interests and their aptitudes, that's such a burden lifted for me as a teacher. It's such a burden when you see a student go into a place where they've chosen it based on data. It's going to fit. It's going to work. They're happy. They're pursuing a direction, and they don't feel like they're swimming upstream. Like, that's what we're here to do.
Yeah.
And it's such an alleviation of responsibility when I'm like, that kid got it. That kid got it. I've got other stories I could tell you, but I know we don't have time. But just like, that kid got it. And I'm like, yep, I don't have to worry about him anymore. He understands. He's his own advocate. He can use YouScience to advocate for himself as he navigates his career prospectus. He can advocate. And that's what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a tool that can give every student the connection and career readiness, like for whatever their next step is, like for school right now, for work, for life. Like, you're going to be connected to do what you need to do, and you'll be ready for it. And I so agree with you, Jason, in that, like, I think the majority of teachers, once they learned about it, yeah, of course, because their to-do list is so long, they're going to have the eye roll at first. They're going to have the sigh, like, but I think once you dig into it, like, it didn't even take that long to get into it to know that this is something different. This is something that could benefit everybody. And I'm picturing local communities using it and them just flourishing. They're like ahead of the innovation curve. Those who are already doing it, like, are, because, I still remember you saying on, I don't know if it was the first time we had you on or the second time we had you on, because you have so many good quotes, but you basically said, like, if you are developing students to leave your community, you are funding the competition.
Absolutely.
And I'm like, YouScience can help direct
that
absolutely. So intentionally, and give agency to students, parents, teachers, admin, community members, industry, like businesses. Everybody can be bought into this. That's so where I'm like,
so it makes your community sticky. Like, no one's advocating to trap students in your community, right? We're not advocating child kidnapping. We're not advocating, like, what we're saying is you want your community to be sticky. You want it to be harder for a student to leave your community, because if they're educating their community, they find a viable job that pays the bills in your community, then they're spending money in your community. So economic development was always meant to be a byproduct of education and workforce development. And when you can leverage workforce development from tax dollars, investments from tax dollars to build workforce, to produce talent, to pipeline talent into your local community, like, that is such a recipe for, like, there's not an economic developer in the country who would say, I don't think we should do that.
It's a good time to go into and get ready for our next episode, because I think we've really established that exposure it's not optional. It's really the foundation of understanding who we have in our communities. And but I think we're getting there. We're almost there right now, is how we're moving from that exposure. And we've already talked about the gap, the problem. We went right at it. And now the purpose. That's the old Scott Carr. What's my purpose? And then how do we connect that, our education and industry and community that creates this lifelong success? And I think that that is where I'm excited to go next. What are you thinking, Allie?
I'm thinking that once again, we're going to have to bring Jason back to help us out here because we love a good two-parter with Jason. So I'm thinking that, Jason, we're going to need you for episode 2 to kind of really help us understand education with purpose and connecting learning to this lifelong and community success for us.
Let's do it right now. I mean, I didn't bring a shirt to change to make it look like it's a different day. But yeah, I'll stick around. Let's do it.
Well, let's wrap this one. We want to thank you all for jumping into our first episode of our partnership with YouScience. Jason will be back in the second one. We're going to dive into connecting learning to lifelong success. I'm sure he has more stories. So for Alli Dahl, the Priv, and obviously our awesome talent pipeline specialist, Jason Van Nuss, I'm Peter Hostrawser. We'll catch you next time on the Disrupt Education Podcast. That's another episode of the Disrupt Education Podcast, where we keep challenging the traditional systems and helping students connect learning to real life. Here's the truth. Many students leave high school with a diploma, but without direction. Readiness isn't just about grades and transcripts. It's about discovering who you are and connecting that to real opportunities. That's why Disrupt Education is proud to partner with YouScience, the platform that helps every student uncover their unique strengths, explore career pathways, and step confidently into the world beyond school. If you believe that every student deserves to be connected and ready for what's next, check out youscience.com/disrupt education-podcast. Because when education and purpose connect, students don't just graduate, they launch.